In a quiet village surrounded by green fields and tall trees, there lived a poor but kind-hearted man named John. He was a farmer, working hard every day to grow food for his family and the village. But no matter how hard he worked, his earnings were never enough. One evening, while returning from the market, John saw an old man sitting under a tree. He looked tired and hungry. John, though he had little, offered the old man his last piece of bread and some water. The old man smiled and said, "You have a good heart, John. Kindness always returns in ways you do not expect." John simply smiled and went home, not thinking much about the old man's words. A few days later, a royal messenger arrived at the village. He carried a letter sealed with golden wax. The letter was for John. Everyone in the village gathered as John nervously opened it. It read, "Dear John, your kindness has reached the ears of the king. He wishes to meet you at the palace tomorrow. Come at once." The villagers cheered for John, though some were jealous. "Why would the king call a poor farmer?" they whispered. The next morning, John dressed in his best clothes, though they were old and torn, and traveled to the palace. The palace was grand, with golden pillars and shining floors. The king sat on a large throne, wearing a crown studded with jewels. He smiled at John and said, "I have heard of your kindness, and I want to reward you. But first I have a challenge." The king handed John a small bag of golden seeds. "Take these seeds and grow them into the healthiest plants you can. Return in 6 months, and I shall reward you." John bowed and left, determined to do his best. John planted the seeds in his best soil, watered them daily, and took care of them with love. But days turned into weeks, and not a single seed sprouted. He tried everything: more water, less water, moving them to different spots, but nothing worked. 6 months later, John stood at the palace gates with an empty pot. Other farmers had brought pots full of tall, healthy plants. John felt ashamed but decided to be honest. The king looked at all the plants and finally asked John, "Where's your plant?" John lowered his head and said, "I tried my best, Your Majesty, but none of the seeds grew." The king suddenly stood up and smiled. He clapped his hands loudly, and the hall fell silent. "John is the only honest man here," the king declared. The other farmers looked at each other in confusion. The king explained, "The seeds I gave you were boiled. They were never meant to grow, yet many of you have brought plants. This means you replaced my seeds with new ones to impress me." Only John was truthful. The king walked down to John and placed a golden chain around his neck. "You have proven that honesty is more valuable than gold. From today, you will be the royal advisor of the kingdom." The entire hall erupted in applause. John, the poor farmer, had won not by growing a plant, but by growing trust. From that day on, John helped the king make fair decisions, and the kingdom prospered.